Hi, I'm Janet Raftis, Quantum Creatrix and Divine Feminine Channel, and I'm here to talk with you today about one of my favorite goddess archetypes, which is that of Persephone, which is also she is a blend of a couple more generalized goddess archetypes, which is the mystic goddess and the dark goddess. So she's got a little bit of all of that mystery, and she is super mysterious in a really profound and powerful way. And so stay with me, because in a little bit, I'm going to share some tools with you to really support you in activating the power of the Persephone archetype within you. And this is so needed today because we have actually a lot of Persephones. Persephone is a really strong archetype in me personally. And it is an archetype of really being connected to your intuitive gifts, but also Persephones have typically experienced a lot of trauma. And so there is trauma that activates the Persephone within you. And then once that Persephone is activated within you, your gifts have a tendency to get stronger, but you may be isolated within them. You may not be in an experience where you feel comfortable experiencing those gifts, tapping into them. And so a lot of the Persephone story can be similar to mine, can be a story of trying to numb those gifts down and really trying to hide from them. Because at the heart of the Persephone story, we have, well, actually, I'm going to share a few different versions of this story, but the one that has been sort of fed to us, right? The one that we have been saturated in, the one that we've grown up in. If you're living here and now, this is the part of the Persephone consciousness that you've been steeped in, is that of the abducted Persephone, the Persephone who was kidnapped and raped, whisked down to the underworld, and then who eventually, found her power and became the queen of the underworld alongside Hades. So in Persephone's story, there is a really important aspect of shadow work and going into the shadow and healing those wounds, because healing those wounds is what allows you to activate your gifts with a sense of safety and power. And so as we get started here, I am going to share a few different versions of her myth because it's important to understand all of them. And so the one that we've grown up with, that you probably read in grade school and maybe high school somewhere, is the story of Persephone with her mother Demeter. They're out cruising around, walking around in the meadows. Persephone goes off with some of her girlfriends. Demeter is off doing, something else somewhere. And Demeter was the agricultural goddess. So she's a mother goddess. She was the agricultural goddess. She was responsible for nourishing all of the life on earth, right? She was responsible for the crops and food. And so anyway, that's relevant, but not necessarily at this moment. So Persephone's in these fields, and she's looking at flowers and she's picking flowers, and Hades notices that she's up there, and Hades is quite taken with her, and he goes up to the surface, he grabs her, he abducts her, he takes her down into the underworld, and he makes her his queen, right? He rapes her, basically. And Demeter is so distraught. She's so distraught that she wanders the earth. She is like, where is my daughter? I must find her. And in her grieving, everything begins to die. Now, Helios, the sun god, he had seen the abduction take place, but he's like, whatevs. He doesn't, interfere in any way. He's a dude, right? This is like real patriarchy here. Like, this is like when the patriarchy really took hold and they really intentionally changed. You may have heard me talk about this before. They have intentionally changed the stories. They have changed the stories so that the women who were perceived as very powerful with the divine mother energy are now very subservient and sort of at the whims of the of men, basically. So Helios saw everything. He told Zeus. Zeus was like, whatever. Zeus, even though Zeus is Persephone's father, he's like totally willing to like hand her off to his brother, no big deal, if it makes Hades happy. And so anyway, Demeter goes to Zeus and she's like, I need my girl back, give her back to me, da da da. And Zeus is like, sorry, no deal. He doesn't really care that Persephone and Demeter may not be happy with this situation. And he goes about his business. Well, Demeter is like, I'm not having it. And so she goes back to Zeus and she was like, I am not going to grow anything ever again, and your people will starve. And Zeus finally, after a bit, realizes, he tries to coerce her, he tries to bribe her, he does all this stuff, and she's just like, this is my line in the sand. And finally Zeus was like, he realizes, right? Oh, if everybody dies, nobody will be able to make offerings to me, right? So that's such a male god thing. So he strikes a deal with Hades, but then, he said, okay, well, bring her back up. But then Hades devises a trick to keep Persephone. And Persephone is the maiden energy in like the whole triple goddess spectrum, right? So there's maiden, mother, Demeter, and then there's a crone energy. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So Persephone, because Persephone is maiden and crone, which is interesting, but I'll talk about that. She's also, sometimes this is perceived to be a continuum with Hecate as well. So it goes Persephone, Demeter, Hecate. But anyway, today we're going to talk about it as Persephone and Demeter. So all of that to say that Hades tricks her. He tricks her in her innocence, and he gives her some pomegranate seeds to eat. Pomegranate is important here because pomegranate is a symbol of the underworld, and it is a symbol of the womb, the uterus. It is a symbol of fertility. It is like blood and seed, right? Like the pomegranate, if you open it up, it looks like blood and seed, and it kind of looks like it would be inside of a woman. And so it is something that is eaten in the underworld to bring about rebirth. So it's very, very connected to this idea of the underworld being a place for in the divine feminine cosmology, the underworld is a place of regeneration and rebirth, right? This is really important. This is what was changed when we got into monotheism and especially like Christianity and other religions, where all of a sudden the underworld was hell and it was a place of eternal damnation. That was not what it was like in the divine feminine cosmology. In that cosmology, it was a place of regeneration and rebirth. And so she eats 4 of the seeds, and Hades is like, haha, you can't go. Now you ate this food in the underworld and you broke a rule, and now you have to stay here. And so Demeter then is just furious, and she goes back to Zeus and she's like, look, dude, I am not giving you any food. This is it. And if you don't release my daughter. So eventually Zeus reaches a compromise with everyone where Persephone is able to come back up for a part of the year. And you will hear different versions of this. Sometimes it's 3 months, 4 months, sometimes it's 6 months. It corresponds to the amount of seeds that she eats. Each seed equals 1 month. So anyway, Persephone comes up though. Demeter is so happy that everything springs back to life. Persephone stays with her for, the amount of time that we have spring and summer. And then she goes back down into the underworld. Demeter begins to grieve again. She grieves until Persephone is again reborn in the spring. So Persephone goes through this cycle of, rebirth, life, death, seemingly, like she goes through that cycle, which is also the moon cycle, the menstrual cycle. Like this is the cycle of the divine feminine. So that's one version of the story. A version that is a little earlier than that one is that, and these are a little shorter, the next two, is that Persephone and Demeter are walking, and Demeter is telling Persephone, they're walking through the meadow, and Demeter is telling Persephone about, all the things that she does, that she is the goddess of life, and she brings abundance and the harvest and food to all of the people. And then she says to her, but I'm also the goddess of the underworld. But I don't have a lot of time to be down there because I'm so busy up here with the living, trying to take care of them. And so Persephone was sort of perplexed by this, and she was like, wow, well, I could do that. So she asks her mother if she can go down there. She says, I don't think she even asked. She just says, I'm going to go down there and I'm going to do that. I'm going to take care of these people. I'm going to be the one that carries them through that transition between death and rebirth. I think that would be a great way to, you know, fulfill some of my desires. And so she goes down there. She connects with Hades, she becomes his queen, and for, you know, half of the year, a little more, she is the one who serves as psychopomp. She helps those who have died move through transition so that they can be reborn. So that, in that version, in the first version, right, she's raped, she's made submissive, she does overcome. Okay, so in that story, I didn't finish all the way. She really claims that queendom. So there is, within Persephone, there is a story of triumph. She does claim that queendom, and she is known as the queen of that underworld. She rules it with Hades. Okay, in the second story, she goes down there, she voluntarily becomes his queen, and, you know, they live happily ever after. Now, in the initial story, going way, way back, because Persephone is a very, very old goddess, as a lot of these are, they have their roots beyond Greek mythology. They have their roots that go back to other parts of the world. And so we see similarities between Persephone and Inanna in the original story. In the original story, there was no Hades or Pluto, right? It's the same, they're the same dude. There was no Hades. There just wasn't. It was just her down there, because that was the Crone aspect of the triple goddess ruled the underworld. And that was like a very, you know, revered and honored part of the life cycle. And so Persephone was the Crone goddess who ruled the underworld. So she was like Inanna, and then I don't know if you know Inanna, maybe I'll talk about her another time. She was a Sumerian goddess, and she's also Ishtar. And she went down into the underworld, she volunteered, she went down, she met with Ereshkigal, who is her twin sister. And so that story is a story of going into the underworld, confronting the shadows. She went through 7 stages of initiation, which is very common in initiation stories, 7 cycles. Each one taking off an article of clothing until she stood before her sister completely naked. Her sister kills her. This is her ego death, right? Her sister kills her, and she hangs her up. It's also a crucifixion story. She's like actually like, you know, put up to die like this, and then she is rescued by her consort, not her husband, not the man who raped her, not the man who lords over her, right? But her consort, her divine masculine consort. He comes down, he rescues her, he takes her back up through 7 more stages, and she becomes the queen of heaven. That was a voluntary going into the underworld experience in order to experience the death of the ego, right? And that is where Persephone's story originally is very connected to that, okay? Persephone also, there's some similar roots there in the goddess energies. And so Persephone, initially, as the Crone goddess, she went into the underworld of her own volition to confront her shadow. Now, what is super important in all of the stories, regardless of which one you are, I just saw 1313, and that is 13 is the number of the goddess. So I wanted to share that. So 13 moon cycles, right? 13 menses. And so in all of the stories, she triumphs in the underworld. And this is what is so important with Persephone, is that she confronts her shadow. She confronts her ego. She confronts her wounding. If we look at the final story where she's raped, right? She confronts the trauma of her experience. She heals it in the underworld. She releases her ego ties. She metaphorically strips herself, and she works in her energy of the shadow. And in doing so, she is able to claim her queendom, right? She is able to become then a very powerful psychopomp, a very powerful mystic energy who is able to see through the veils and support those on the other side. And so she is, you know, the gifts of her archetype is that she's very connected to the meta, right? All of those words that start with meta, para, super, right? That's her. She's in the astral. She's in the cosmos. She is like really living in that space of the mystery, right? In the darkness. She's in the underworld. She's in the cosmos. She inhabits both of those realms, which is very, very powerful. Oh, I was going to talk about how she was originally just the Crone goddess. There was another goddess, Crone. Crone was the maiden goddess. Demeter was the mother goddess. Persephone, in that last myth that we heard, she was the Crone goddess. That was her only role. Persephone and Crone, over the course of time, became very confused and became perceived as the same energy. So originally, you might hear now Crone as being interchangeable with Persephone in the maiden form, but originally they were two different goddesses. And so, and that's, you know, that's relevant to the transition here of the stories and sort of the stripping of Persephone's power, because that's what it was. Like, you know, changing that mythology from where she was ruling on her own, the underworld, as a place of regeneration and rebirth. Her ruling that on her own was a place of power. And so it was very intentional, again, that this mythology, that this story was changed. And it was changed when men started recording the stories that we know of, right? So when Homer and Hesiod began to write the stories, we see that, and it probably had started changing earlier, but that was when language ingrained the gaslighting, basically the propaganda. It made the propaganda much more powerful, and it made it stick, right? Because it's been thousands of years now, and we're still like living through that lens, that toxic patriarchal lens. And so again, Persephone comes into her power by going into the underworld. And so this is what is really important for any of you who resonate with the Persephone archetype. So for example, in my story, I had some early childhood trauma, and that activated my Persephone. And then I was terrified of the things in the dark, and I tried to stuff it down. I eventually did that with alcohol and drugs, which is very common, not 100%. So just, you know, these things are common, they're not absolutes. Let's say it that way. So, but it's very common for Persephone to do this. It's also very common for Persephones to have sexual trauma, whether it happens in early childhood or they're raped in their adolescence, and also in womanhood. But it's very common for Persephones. This is like trends, okay, to be raped in adolescence, which was my story as well. Further shutting down of my gifts, a further denial of the shadow and of the trauma, until eventually the threshold was no longer sustainable for me, okay? And this happens a lot. And so even when I began my healing journey, I went into the mystical Persephone before I went into the shadow Persephone, which was not the best way to do things, because as the embodied Persephone, who has healed the wounds of the shadow, is the Persephone that is able to hold a powerful container for her psychic gifts, right? And so she is a balanced mystic. She's a balanced dark goddess. So as you move into the embodiment of your Persephone, the most important thing really is that you look at your shadow and that you heal the wounds of the shadow. Now, once you've done that, you will notice your gifts coming online very naturally. I'm going to give you a few tools, but it really happens very, very naturally for those of you who have any resonance with this archetype. Now, even if you don't, but you'd like to activate some Persephone within you, because it is really healthy to do shadow work no matter what. And it is really healthy to be embodied in using your mystical gifts no matter what. You can, do that shadow work, do that healing work. connect with the energy of Persephone, just call her to you. Set up something on your altar that resonates with her and that will support you in your connection to her. And then some suggestions are, one, to work with your dreams. The dreams are beautiful gateways to the unconscious, and the unconscious / subconscious is the realm of the underworld. That's where all of this stuff hangs out. There's so much information there for you. There's so much ready to make itself known to you, and that is in fact making itself known to you. And so any dream work that you can do, and I like to put stones under my pillow when I'm doing this, and blue kyanite I have found personally to be a really, really powerful stone to activate deeper dream states. And I just put some kyanite under my pillow. I let my dreams happen. I set intentions with Goddess and my guides beforehand of what I would like to see. Sometimes they see it, sometimes it's something different. Like, I trust that process too. But you can set intentions with the Goddess and really work in that energy of activating the truth that wants to be revealed to you, so that you can go deeper into the experience of what wants to be healed and what wants to be shown. Your dreams might become very psychic playgrounds for you. And that in and of itself is an activation of your gifts, while also revealing to you where the wounding is still prevalent. Other things that you can do is that you can work with the energy of Persephone in your meditation, and you can work on opening your third eye. Now, again, I would only suggest working on opening your third eye if you have done the shadow work, if you've done the embodiment work. But work on opening the third eye energy once you've done that, once you feel safe, once you feel embodied there, and brings Persephone in. Ask her to come to you and to really do some energy work on that center. And this is something that is really easy. It's accessible to you, and that you can, it doesn't have to be Persephone. Even if you feel better with angels or whomever, call them in. You can ask your higher self to work on this with you. You can hire a healer to work on it with you, whatever feels best. But Persephone is a third eye goddess, and she is very much, her perceptions are third eye experiences. And so any work you can do with the third eye. Also, of course, on a purely physical level, taking fluoride out of your diet would also support the decalcification of the pineal gland. Anything you can do to support your pineal gland will support the opening of your third eye. And any other intuitive development work that you can do. But I do suggest being with Persephone, like really taking time with her, sitting with her, loving on her, and calling her to be with you. That will be a powerful catalyst to the activation of this archetype within you. And so that is all. Simple but powerful. And just remember that with Persephone, all that you can do to heal your wounds and then to embody that psychic queen that you are, because if you feel any resonance with this archetype, you are a psychic queen, to activate that within you and to really own that energy of being comfortable in the underworld. All right, so thank you so much for being here with me today. If this video resonated with you, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. So just hit that subscribe button there. If you have a particular goddess or goddess archetype you'd like me to work with, I would love to do so. Sometimes I just share stories, sometimes I share tools, sometimes I share energy activations and transmissions. So this was certainly a transmission as well. So know that I have been feeling Persephone the whole time. But sometimes I do actually energy activations, all kinds of different things that are related to the goddess and the divine feminine. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a beautiful day. Bye.